You planning on making any purchases this week? If you're like me, in the back of my mind, and sometimes up near the very front of my mind, are things that I have sort of in a list. I'm going to get one of those one of these days. Or I do a little shopping and I think, well, okay, I'm not sure if that's what I want, but I think that's what I want. I'm going to look a little more into it. Or I want that, but I don't have the money for it. We buy stuff all the time, don't we? We got to be careful about that. But sometimes you find something that you just can't pass up. It's just too good of a deal. Solomon said in Proverbs chapter 23 and verse 23, and I think it's divided like that because God wanted us to remember where it was. Proverbs 23:23, easy passage to remember its location. It says this, buy the truth, sell it not. Buy the truth, sell it not. When you buy something like a car, do you ever buy it thinking about the resale value? Some people do. That's one of the big selling things that salesmen use. Oh, this car is going to have good resale value. Now, to me, that's kind of backwards. Why would you buy a car with the thought of selling it later? We buy a car and we run it into the ground. We just run it till the wheels fall off, sort of. You've heard people talk about that. But cars, houses, everything you buy that's of this world is going to wear out at some point. You're going to have to replace it. But if you buy the truth, it never goes out of style. Never goes out of date. It never loses its currency. And isn't that an interesting word that we apply to the money that we spend? Currency. There's another interesting word, con man. Con man. Now, probably all of us know what a con man is, except for maybe the little ones. But for you little ones, a con man is somebody who is a thief. They wrap you up in a lie, and then they take advantage of you having believed the lie. And who knows what the con part of con man stands for? Anybody? Stands for confidence. Confidence man. He's a confidence man. Now, why would you call somebody who's going to steal from you a confidence man? Well, because that's what they do. They work you into a point where they've got your confidence, and you're willing, because you trust them, to hand over your money. They've got your confidence. You give them your money, you never see them again. Con man. And you've probably watched the news like I have. It's usually older people. Somebody comes and offers them a deal they can't refuse, and because they're trusting and older, they write a check for hundreds or thousands of dollars, and they're taken advantage of. And that's when I think thoughts that are not necessarily Christian sometimes in situations like that. I don't know, maybe it is very Christian to think about judgment coming on a con man, because that's what I think about when I hear those kinds of stories. How many times does the Bible teach us not to be deceived? Do not be deceived. Now, why would you tell someone not to be deceived? Because there's a very real possibility that they might be deceived. When I was a kid and I'd go out, Mom would say, watch out for copperheads. Now, why would she say watch out for copperheads? Because there were copperheads. When God says do not be deceived, He's warning us that there are ample opportunities to be deceived. And when you think about the Bible, how does it begin? You see, you got the creation in the first 2 chapters. What happens in chapter 3? Deceit. The devil enters in. He talks to Eve. And he gives her the bad word about God. That's what he does. If you can demean God, if you can cast aspersions on His character with the only woman that's in existence, you're going to do some damage, and that's what he did. This is what the devil said to Eve. God knows that in the day you eat from this forbidden fruit, your eyes will be opened and you'll be like God, knowing good and evil. Well, that's not a very long sentence, is it? But it was enough to deceive Eve into thinking that God did not have her best interest at heart. And those kinds of lies are still being told today. This was the beginning of it. When you go to Revelation, you know what it says in Revelation chapter 12 and verse 9? It talks about Satan, the great deceiver. This is what it says. Revelation chapter 12 and verse 9. The great dragon was thrown down, and the serpent of old, Who came to Eve in the garden? Well, it was the devil in the form of a serpent, who is called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. And he was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And then it goes on to talk about how he went about trying to destroy the Lord's people after that. But how does he destroy the Lord's people? Same way he destroyed the relationship between Adam and Eve and God in the garden. Destroys it with lies. That's what we were talking about this morning. Talking about freedom. What's the greatest enemy to freedom? The lies. The lies of the devil. Jesus, of course, said, "You will know the truth." And what will the truth do? It'll set us free. That's what truth does. It brings the freedom we talked about this morning. And I don't know, we didn't plan this again. Talking about deception tonight, and there was a great deception talked about this morning, talking about being set free tonight by the truth. Buy it, don't sell it, because you can't find anything as valuable as the truth. And here we are talking about that tonight. In John's Gospel, chapter 1, John the Apostle is writing about John the Baptizer, the forerunner of Christ. And he says of John the Baptizer in verse 8, "He was not that light, but he came to testify about the light." And then in verse 9 he says, "There was the true light, which coming into the world enlightens every man." Now, why would Jesus be described as the true light? Because there's a light that's not necessarily true. It looks like light. It appears like light. Paul, when he wrote to the church at Corinth, he said that Satan himself becomes an angel of light. So be not deceived. There are a lot of ways to be deceived. But Jesus is the true light. This is a wonderful thing about the New Testament. You can read the New Testament and you can know the truth. You can know the truth, and the truth will make you free. And that truth, if you hang on to it, will make you immune from the lies that are fostered by the devil and his demons and his minions here on the earth. Every lie you can be immune to. Isn't that a marvelous thought to just think about that? There's no lie that anybody can tell you that you'll get sucked up in if you'll hold on to this truth, because Jesus is the true light. But not only is he the true light, when you get to chapter 4 of John's Gospel, you read this in verse 23. John 4:23, "An hour is coming, and now is when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth." So if there are true worshipers, what must there also be? There must be worshipers that are not true worshipers, and we know that because that's exactly what Jesus was talking to this woman about at the well in Samaria. Jesus is the true light, and there are true worshipers. And then he said this in chapter 6 and verse 32. "Truly I say to you, it is not Moses who has given you the bread out of heaven, it is my Father who gives you the true bread out of heaven." What is the true bread? That's the bread that really feeds our souls. I don't know, are you confused when you go to the grocery store and you get down that bread aisle and you're looking at that stuff and it all looks the same, and you're looking at labels and comparing sugars and carbohydrates, and how many of you look to see if there's any, what's that stuff, the sugar that's made out of corn syrup? Yeah, that's it. And it might say whole grain, but it might not be 100% whole grain. It might just have 10% whole grain, but it says whole grain. Well, it says whole grain. Yeah, it's got 10% whole grain. And you're trying to figure out what's going on. You know what's happening? Man, we're being deceived. And I stand there in the grocery store, right there at Walmart, I'm trying to figure, which is the true bread? Well, he's up there, and he's down here, and he's in our hearts. And he speaks to us out of this book. He's the true bread. No matter what you buy at the grocery store, this is the true bread. Jesus' word, the word that he gave us, his apostles, is that light that is the bread that feeds our souls. And then in John chapter 15, Jesus says, "I am the true vine." Well, if there's a true vine, okay, here we go again. There must be a vine that's not true. There must be something you can attach yourself to that's not going to feed you, not going to nourish you. It's going to be a vine you attach yourself to that will not enable you to produce fruit for God. Because that's what Jesus says of himself. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away, and every branch that bears fruit, he prunes it so that it may bear more fruit. In Jesus, in that true vine, we can be fruitful. Because he is the true vine. And then you get a little farther in chapter 17. Jesus lifts his eyes and he prays to the Father, and he says this in verse 3. This is eternal life. John chapter 17 and verse 3. This is eternal life, that they may know you, the only true God. Are there other gods? Not really. Now, there have been idol gods, and we can make our own gods by worshiping things that are not God. But there really is only one true and living God, and that's the one that Jesus himself is affirming here in John chapter 17, verse 3. The true God, who is the one who gave us the true vine, who is the true bread, who is the true light, and whose are the true worshipers. So there is truth in this world, but there's a lot of falsehood, a lot of lies. And you and I, see, one of the great things about Christianity is that knowing the truth that God gives us makes us immune to the lies of the world. But one of the dangers can be that the things we learn in Christ, if we're not careful, can make us susceptible to some of the lies. And you might say, what in the world do you mean by that, Marty? Well, here it is. We've got a built-in system of humility, because that's what God teaches us, is to be humble. And being humble, we think, hey, we don't know everything. And since I don't know everything, if somebody else is talking, I should listen to them to see if they know anything. Well, is that pretty good advice, to listen to other people? Well, sure it is. Now, how are you going to know if it's the truth or not? Well, you've got to keep yourself close to this Word. Don't be so arrogant that you never listen to anybody else. How are you going to talk to anybody about the Lord if you never listen to somebody else? But when you listen to someone else, you better know the Word well enough, you better know the truth well enough to understand whether or not they're telling you the truth. Built-in ignorance. We know we don't know everything, and so we feel like, well, we should listen, and we should listen. But the main thing about this, in my estimation, is that we need to trust what God has given us. And if we trust what God has given us, then we don't have to worry about the lies that are in the world. And if we understand that our only real loyalty is due to God, I don't know anybody else's loyalty. Nobody else died for me. Only God sent His Son, and since He died for me, I owe Him my loyalty and then nobody else. Another problem we have is that we've got this conviction that we've got to be nice. And that to be nice, we have to be agreeable. And somebody tells us something that's just not true, and we know it's not true, but we think, well, I don't want to be disagreeable, so I'll just go along with that. But you know it's a lie. You know it's not the truth. Now, one of the worst things you can do to someone is to lie to them. I'm assuming you agree with me on that. Isn't that a bad thing to do to somebody, to lie to them? Of the 10 Commandments, wasn't there one about bearing false witness? Yeah, right up there with thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not bear false witness. Yeah, don't lie. 10 commandments, and of those 10, there's one that says don't lie. Well, let me go you one better, but I'm not really going you one better. This is God going us one better. When he gets to Proverbs chapter 6, we started with Proverbs 23:23. What does Proverbs 23:23 say? Buy the truth, sell it not. If you don't remember anything else from this lesson tonight, remember Proverbs 23:23. I'm going to ask you that again. Buy the truth, sell it not. But then you get to chapter 6. You say, wait a minute, Marty, we're backing up to get to chapter 6. Oh, come on, tell me you've never backed up in your life a little bit. Back up to chapter 6. You know what chapter 6 of Proverbs says, starting in verse 16? It says there's 7 things that the Lord hates. 7 things. Now, there were 10 commandments, and one of those 10 was thou shalt not bear false witness. But of the 7 things that the Lord hates here in Proverbs chapter 6, verse 16 and following, it's this. Haughty eyes, that's number 1. And then a lying tongue is number 2. Okay. Hands that shed innocent blood is number 3. A heart that devises wicked plans is number 4. Feet that run rapidly to evil is number 5. A false witness who utters lies, that's number 6, and that's another one about lying. And then one who spreads strife among brothers. How do you generally spread strife among brothers? With a lie, with a falsehood, with something that's not exactly the truth, with deceit. So of these 7 things that God hates, 3 of them have to do with lying. That's not fake news. That's real news. Except it's not news at all. That's 3,000 years old right there. At least that's when it was written down, but it's a little older than that. So the worst thing you can do to somebody else is lie to them. But if you want to be so nice that you just allow the lie to continue, then you're just becoming part of that lie now. You don't want to controvert the lie. You don't want to make things uncomfortable, so you just go along with it. Here's something to watch for. Anybody who's trying to tell you something, and they make you feel like you're not being nice because you disagree with them, they don't respect you. That's one of the things that's come up recently in these discussions about human sexuality and the practice of sexuality. I say, well, if you disagree, then you hate. You're a hater. You know what that is? That's a lie. What if we just presumed that everybody you disagreed with hated you? Or you hated everybody you disagreed with? Is there anybody in your family that you agree with on everything? No? I guess we all just hate each other. Each one of us in our own way, we value truth, and we're seeking truth in our own way. And some of us have become more comfortable with a higher level of truth than others, and so we embrace more. And others, oh, I don't know about that yet. I'm not comfortable with that, but it may still be the truth. Well, just hold on, just wait and be patient, because they may be coming along. But just because somebody doesn't agree with you doesn't mean they hate you, doesn't mean they disrespect you, doesn't mean they don't like you. Allow people to disagree with you, and perhaps this is even more important, allow yourself to disagree with others. Because when it comes right down to it, you're not disagreeing with people. You're disagreeing with ideas that may or may not be of the truth. And one of the things that the devil is expert at, and his minions are expert at, is dressing the truth up to look, or dressing a lie up to make it look like the truth. What did Jesus say about false prophets? Well, what is a false prophet? That's somebody who's going to tell you something that's false. What did he say about them? He said, beware. They dress up how? Sheep's clothing. Who's afraid of a sheep? But if it's a wolf in sheep's clothing, you better be afraid. You better be afraid. Truth. Buy it. Don't sell it. Where do you find that passage? Proverbs 23:23. All right. There you go. Another problem we have sometimes is as Christians and as decent, God-fearing people, we have this innate desire to get along with people and be part of the group. We're designed to be familial. That's the word, isn't it? Familial. Family-like people. We want to be part of a group. We're designed to be part of a group. That's the way we're supposed to function. So we don't want to be different. We don't want to be weird. We don't want to be outsiders. But here's a question. Who was Jesus like? And only God. You could not look at Jesus. You still can't look at Jesus. You can't read about Jesus and study him. Oh, yeah, Jesus was like this guy or that guy. No. You can't really compare Jesus to anybody else because he's the one we all compare ourselves to. At least that should be the way it is in our minds. We should be comparing ourselves to him. Jesus was not afraid to be different. He was different simply by his nature. But what was his nature? His nature was he was divine. He was absolute perfection, even though he was in the flesh. And that made him so very different from the people he was around in the first century, and it makes him very different from us. I'm not sure which direction I should go with this, because on one hand, I think if I was in the presence of Jesus today, if he came in the flesh and was here right now, I feel like since he's God and he's my Savior and he died for me on the cross and he's forgiven my sin through his blood, then on the one hand, I would be so comfortable in his presence. On the other hand, I might be like Isaiah, rather, and say, woe is me. Remember that, Isaiah chapter 6? Found himself in the presence of God, and he says, woe is me, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. So I'm not sure how I would feel about Jesus, because he's so completely different from everyone else. And so when I think about this desire that we have to be a part of the group and not to be ostracized by our views, not to be set apart because of the things we believe and profess to believe, not the things that we're willing to put out there, says, yes, this is what I believe. People might ask you, are you a member of the Lord's church? Remember Peter? Outside the trial, Jesus was on trial. And that young girl sees him and says, hey, weren't you with Jesus? You ever put yourself in that place? And you think, oh, man, I never would have denied the Lord. Or maybe you don't think that. Maybe you're like me and you think, I never would have been there in the first place. Man, I'd have been going anywhere but be around where Jesus was on trial, because they're fixing to put him to death. I don't want to die. I don't know what I would have done. You don't know what you would have done, but we think about those things. We think, my goodness. When the question comes down to it, are we going to be faithful and loyal to him? We're going to have to make some decisions. And it's far, far better for us to make those kinds of decisions before we're in the hot seat, so to speak. To decide beforehand, if it ever comes down to it, I'm going to make sure that I never deny my Lord. I'm going to confess him, no matter how embarrassing or how difficult it might seem under the circumstances. I'm going to stay with him. I'm going to confess him as my Lord, no matter how silly it seems to make me look in the eyes of other people. And I'm going to do that because he was unique, and I'm following him. He was absolutely unique. Nobody was like him. Nobody's willing to be or able to be compared with him. And since he was different, I'm going to follow him, and I'm going to be different too. And that's exactly what he said would happen. When he sent the 10 out on the limited commission, he said, if they've called me Beelzebub, what are they going to call you? So when you and I refuse to be deceived, when we stick with the truth, when we refuse to go along with the group simply because we don't want to be different, or because we're willing to be different, people are going to come down on us, and we've got to be ready for that to happen. Mentally ready. Even if we don't have the answers, we still know what the truth is, and we never must allow ourselves to shirk that truth. What was it that Exodus 23:2 said? That do not follow a multitude to do evil. And this is an interesting thing about our culture and our situation. With our media, it makes us think everybody thinks a certain way. That's what the media is tending to do to us as Americans. It makes us think, oh, everybody sees it this way, but they don't. They don't. I think it was in Bible class this morning, I asked a question. Do you remember what happened a few years ago with Chick-fil-A? Wasn't that interesting? The question came up about Chick-fil-A. Oh, Chick-fil-A, they're horrible people, because the CEO of Chick-fil-A said he supported family marriage. He didn't say anything about being against homosexuals or the practice of he just said he is in favor of the traditional family, and that got him in hot water. And Chick-fil-A was put out as a spectacle, but all of a sudden, Chick-fil-A had more business than they can handle, because people were lining up across the country to get chicken. And it had nothing to do with chicken. So when we think that, oh man, I got to be like the group, no. And it comes back to another passage Mike was talking about this morning. In the Revelation, we see a multitude without number. Who is that multitude without number? Well, they're the ones who are wearing the white robes, washed in the blood of Christ. Those are our brothers and sisters. That's us. It's not like you got to be like this world to belong. There's a better world to belong to. And that's the world that God has brought for us. Even Ben Franklin. He said a lot of things that we still quote today, but one of the things was, he said, a mob is a monster. Plenty of heads, but no brains. Now that's Ben Franklin. That's pretty smart, pretty wise. We're all trusting souls, aren't we? We want to believe other people to be trustworthy because we are. And that can help set us up sometimes to be deceived, because perhaps we trust too much. But what did Jesus say about that? Again, when he sent out the 70, he said, be wise as serpents, harmless as doves. It's one thing to be trusting, it's another thing to be gullible. And sometimes we allow ourselves to be gullible. Well, 6 things on questions to ask if someone presents you with something you think is false. 6 things on that, and we'll close. Somebody presents you with an idea. Does that idea go against the obvious teachings of God? Well, if it does, there you know. You know it's not the truth. Don't be deceived by that. If it goes against the obvious teachings of God, forget it. It's not the truth. Number 2, somebody presents you with something you think, you question, what's going on here? Examine the character of those who present that idea. What is their character like? What is their background like? I don't mean to, I'm not trying to get ugly or pick on anybody. Well, no, somebody might think I am, so I won't do that. But if you'll look for this, you'll see it. You'll see the hypocrisy in so many in the world that are clamoring for us to behave after a moral fashion. And if you look at the positions and the views who are clamoring for us to be moral, for conservatives, for Republicans, for Christians, whatever moniker they want to put on us, whatever they think we are, when they clamor for us to be moral, look at their moral practices. People who are saying we need to confiscate all the guns or get gun control because we need to protect our children, are those the same people who are saying we need to have abortion free and ready for everybody who wants one? How can you clamor to protect children on one hand and be for abortion on the other hand? There's so many things like that in our culture and in our society that, because perhaps we don't look far enough into it, we don't see the deception that's there. We don't see the hypocrisy that's there, so that we can call it for what it is. And calling something for what it is isn't being hateful, it's not being ugly. It's just standing up for the truth. And that's what every Christian needs to be doing. Standing up for what we know to be true. Number 3, you're presented with an idea and you're not sure if it's true or not. Well, what do the most mature, godly people you know believe about that idea? Take that idea to the people you know are godly. People you know are mature. Ask them, present that to them, see what they think about it. Get their opinion, get their idea. Now, I'm not saying that's the basis for our faith. God is obviously the basis for our faith, His Word that He's given us. But that was number 1. If you're not sure whether or not it transgresses anything about God, go to the people that you know are mature and spiritual. Number 4, are you being rushed into believing it, rushed into accepting it, or even bullied into believing it? See, if you've got the truth, you don't need to bully anybody to believing the truth. But if you've got a lie, somebody might want to rush you into it. You ever buy a car? And the guy who's trying to sell you the car is really pushing hard? No, this isn't a lesson on buying cars. It's a lesson on truth. Not being deceived. But if you're getting pushed into something, back out. Back out. Don't allow yourself to be pushed into anything. What is Christianity? It's a religion of faith. It's not a religion of push. It's a religion of faith. Jesus didn't push anybody. When He was talking to that rich young ruler, and He loved him, and that rich young ruler walked away, what did Jesus do? He let him. He let him walk away. You don't read about Jesus in the pages of the New Testament chasing after him. Oh, no, you misunderstood me. That's not what I mean. Oh, come on, let's talk about it. No. People walk away from the Lord, he lets them walk away. Maybe there's a lesson in there for us. Number 5, is this thing that you are being pressured to accept, is it likely to cause friction between you and people that you respect? If it's going to cause friction, if I adopt this, that's going to put me at odds with these people over there and I really respect them, well, then you better look at what you're being pressured to accept. And number 6, if you'll pardon the expression, what does your gut tell you? You'd think mine has a lot to say, and it's probably loud. But you know what I'm talking about. And I don't know how all of this works. I know I have a spirit. I'm not exactly sure how my own spirit works. I also know that the Spirit of God is living in me. I'm not exactly sure how that works. And so when I am faced with an idea and I'm thinking, oh man, I got a weird feeling. Where do you have that weird feeling? In your stomach. Why do you have a weird feeling in your stomach? Because there's something that just doesn't quite ring true about this. I got a bad feeling about this. Pay attention to that feeling. Husbands, you may not have this as well as your wife does, but I'll tell you this, if your wife says, I got a bad feeling about this, you better listen to her. You better listen to her. Allow the most, I was going to say the most gutful person, because we're talking about that feeling in your gut, but accept the inclinations of others that you love and respect when it comes to what you feel about something. Because sometimes you can't put your finger on it. Don't you hate that? Wouldn't it be great if everything that came down the pike, I could just put my finger on what's wrong with that, but sometimes you can't. Sometimes you don't know for sure. I remember years ago, I was in a congregation and there was a guy that said, I really think it would be good for our young people if we pulled our young people off and had a separate group with our young people. We worked with them individually because, they're on a different level than the adults. And if we pulled them away and worked with them separately, now, I don't know about you, but I had a horrible feeling about that. I just don't read much in the New Testament about the congregation of the Lord being separated based on age. Now, for Bible classes, sure, have Bible classes, but when you're pulling them away, because they were talking about not just Bible class, they were talking about having a separate communion service. Oh, wow, that just, something wrong with that. Listen to your gut, if you will, if you'll permit me to say that, make that claim. Well, I hope this has been helpful tonight. There's just so many things out there in the world, so many lies that the devil has already told. And when Jesus was confronted with the Pharisees, he said, you guys are telling lies and you're of your father the devil. And there's still a lot of people in this world who are of their father the devil, who are not accepting the things of God and who are putting forth lies that will ruin us. So be careful out there, because it's real out there. You turn on your TV, you're going to hear some lies. You turn on your radio, you're probably going to hear some lies. You open up a book or a magazine, you're probably going to see some lies. You turn on your computer, just a few lies on the computer. We're in the world, you can't get away from it. But where are you going to find the truth? God and His Word. What are you going to do with the truth? You're going to buy it. You're never going to sell it. What's it going to cost you? No matter what it costs you, buy the truth. Do not sell it. We're going to stand and sing a song of invitation. And you know what that is. We're inviting you to respond as God has offered the invitation through His Son, Jesus Christ. That's what that cross means. Jesus said, if I be lifted up from the earth, I will draw all men to me. And so we're extending that invitation to you to be drawn to God through Jesus Christ tonight. And if you'd like to come forward and have us help you in some way, we invite you while we stand and sing the song of invitation.